Denise Patterson stood frozen between the organic apples and the conventional ones, her heart hammering so hard she was sure the entire fresh market could hear it. The man loading bananas into his cart 20 feet away had David Patterson's laugh, the same deep, rumbling sound that used to fill their kitchen on Sunday mornings when he'd flip pancakes and tell terrible jokes to make the twins giggle. But David Patterson was dead. She'd buried him 3 years ago. The man turned, and Denise's grocery basket slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the linoleum floor. Apples rolled everywhere. A jar of pasta sauce shattered, spreading marinara like blood across the white tiles. It was him. Every line of his face, every gesture, "Daddy, can we get the chocolate chip cookies?" A little boy, maybe 7 years old, tugged at the man's jacket. Next to him stood a woman with honey blonde hair, pushing a cart with a toddler girl strapped in the seat. "Of course, buddy," the man said, ruffling the boy's hair with the same gentle motion Denise remembered from 1,000 bedtimes with Jasmine and Jada. "Go grab 2 packages. The woman smiled up at him. "You spoil them, Robert." "Robert. Not David. Robert." Denise's vision tunneled. The fluorescent lights above seemed to strobe. The cheerful grocery store sounds, the beeping scanners, the soft jazz, the chatter of shoppers, all faded to a dull roar. 3 years. 3 years of grief counseling and sleepless nights. 3 years of watching their 16-year-old twins struggle with losing their father. 3 years of scraping by on his life insurance payout while she rebuilt their shattered lives from nothing. And here he was, alive, happy, with a whole other family. A store employee appeared beside her, concern creasing his young face. "Ma'am? Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've seen a ghost." The man who used to be her husband was walking toward the checkout lanes now, his arm around the blonde woman's shoulders, the 2 children chattering excitedly about their grocery haul. A perfect little family. Complete without her. Complete without Jasmine and Jada. Denise forced her legs to move, following at a distance, her mind spinning with impossible questions. How was he alive? Where had he been? Why had he left them to believe he was dead? The funeral, God, the funeral. She'd sobbed over an empty casket while he was somewhere starting over with someone new. She watched him load groceries into a silver SUV, watched him buckle the toddler into her car seat with practiced ease, watched him kiss the woman goodbye before she drove away with the children. Watched him get into a blue sedan and pull out of the parking lot. Denise stood in the grocery store parking lot for 20 minutes after his car disappeared, her phone buzzing incessantly in her purse. Finally, she fumbled it out. "Mom, where are you?" Jasmine's voice carried that edge of worry that had become too familiar since David's death. Her daughters had learned too young that parents could vanish without warning. "You said you'd be back an hour ago." Denise stared at the empty parking space where the man who might be her husband had stood moments before. "I'm coming home, baby. I'm coming home right now." But as she sat in her car, hands shaking too badly to turn the key, Denise knew nothing would ever be the same. The careful life she'd built from the ashes of her grief was about to crumble again. Only this time, it wouldn't be death tearing her family apart. It would be the terrible, impossible possibility that David Patterson had never died at all. Denise pulled into her driveway with no memory of the drive home. The modest 2-story house in East Cleveland looked the same as always, freshly painted shutters, the small garden where David used to grow tomatoes now converted to low-maintenance hostas, the front porch where she'd sobbed in Grace Thompson's arms 3 years ago when the Coast Guard called off the search. Jasmine met her at the door before she could even get her keys out. At 16 she was David's daughter through and through, tall, serious, with questioning eyes that missed nothing. "Mom, what happened? You look like I've been hit by a truck," Jada finished, appearing behind her sister. Where Jasmine was all sharp angles and intensity, Jada moved through the world with an artist's fluid grace, but even she looked worried now. "We saw you pull up 10 minutes ago. You've just been sitting in the car." Denise forced a smile, the same one she'd perfected during those first awful months after David's death when she had to be strong for everyone else. "Just tired, girls. Work was crazy today." It wasn't entirely a lie. Her job as an insurance claims adjuster was always crazy. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days investigating suspicious claims, looking for evidence of fraud and deception. Yet she'd never questioned the circumstances of her own husband's death. Never thought to investigate the man she'd loved and trusted completely. "Grandma Evelyn called," Jasmine said, following Denise into the kitchen. "She wants to know if we're still coming to Sunday dinner this weekend." Evelyn Patterson. David's mother, who'd grieved her only son's death almost as deeply as Denise had. who'd helped with the funeral arrangements, who'd held the twins when they cried, who still kept David's graduation photo on her mantelpiece next to a memorial candle. What would she say if Denise told her what she'd seen today? Mom? Jada was studying her with the same intense focus she brought to her art. Are you sure you're okay? You're acting weird. Denise pulled ingredients from the refrigerator for dinner, her movements mechanical. Just processing a difficult case at work. You know how it is. But her hands were shaking again and Jasmine noticed immediately. What kind of case? Insurance fraud, Denise said without thinking, then froze. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unintended meaning. Both girls were staring at her now. Jasmine's expression had shifted from worried to suspicious. Mom, Dad's death wasn't, the insurance company paid out, right? There wasn't any question about. No, Denise said quickly. Too quickly. No, of course not. This is a completely different case. A car accident claim that doesn't add up. She was lying to her daughters. The realization hit her like a physical blow. After 3 years of brutal honesty about grief and loss, after teaching them that they could survive anything as long as they faced it together, she was lying to protect them from something that might destroy what was left of their world. Or maybe she was lying to protect herself. Maybe she couldn't bear the possibility that everything she thought she knew about their life had been a carefully constructed fiction. Her phone buzzed. Grace Thompson's name appeared on the screen. I need to take this, Denise said, stepping into the living room. Grace, hi. Don't hi me, Denise Patterson. You were supposed to meet me for lunch today, remember? I waited at Stella's for an hour. Denise closed her eyes. She'd completely forgotten. I'm sorry, Grace. Something came up at work and I... What kind of something? Grace's voice sharpened. As a social worker, she was trained to read the spaces between words, to hear what people weren't saying. You sound off. I'm fine. That's what you said for 6 months after David died, and we both know how that worked out. Grace's tone gentled. Talk to me, Dee. What's going on? Denise looked through the kitchen doorway at her daughters, who were pretending to do homework while clearly eavesdropping on her conversation. How could she even begin to explain what she'd seen? How could she voice the impossible out loud? Can you come over? She heard herself ask. Tonight after the girls go to bed? Of course. Should I bring wine or tissues? Both, Denise said, her voice breaking slightly. Definitely both. After she hung up, she stood in the living room they'd decorated together 7 years ago, looking at the family photos that lined the mantelpiece. David at their wedding, grinning in his rented tux. David holding the twins as newborns, exhausted but radiant. David teaching them to ride bikes, to swim, to drive. David in his Coast Guard uniform, the last photo taken before his final deployment. The deployment that had supposedly ended with his death in a boating accident off the coast of Lake Erie. His body never recovered, they'd said. Lost to the depths of the lake in a sudden storm. But the man in the grocery store had been very much alive. Very much real. Very much David Patterson, even if he was calling himself Robert now. Mom? Jada appeared beside her, concern etched in every line of her face. You're crying. Denise touched her cheek, surprised to find it wet. Just thinking about Daddy, she said, which was true enough. Jada wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, and for a moment, Denise felt like the child instead of the parent. I miss him too. Every day. I know, baby. I know. But as she held her daughter, Denise wondered if they'd been missing someone who had never actually been gone. Someone who'd chosen to leave them behind and start fresh, letting them grieve a death that had never happened. The thought made her stomach turn. She pulled away gently and forced another smile. Go finish your homework. I'll call you when dinner's ready. As Jada headed back to the kitchen, Denise looked again at the photos on the mantel. Somewhere in this house, packed away in a box she couldn't bear to go through, were David's personal effects from the Coast Guard base. His wallet, his watch, the letter he'd left for her just in case something happened. Tomorrow she decided she would find that box. She would look at those effects with new eyes, searching for clues she'd been too grief-stricken to notice 3 years ago. Tonight, she would tell Grace everything and hope her best friend could help her figure out how to move forward when the ground beneath her feet had just shifted completely. But first, she had to get through dinner with her daughters. She had to pretend their world wasn't on the verge of shattering again. She had to be strong. Even if she felt like she was drowning all over again. Grace Thompson arrived at 9:30 with a bottle of wine, a box of tissues, and the kind of no-nonsense expression that had served her well in 15 years of social work. She took one look at Denise's face and headed straight for the kitchen. Where are the girls? Grace asked, pulling wine glasses from the cabinet like she lived there. Which, in many ways she did. She'd been Denise's closest friend since their college days at Cleveland State, the sister Denise had never had, the rock that had kept her grounded through David's death and everything that came after. Upstairs, Jasmine's studying for her SATs, and Jada's working on some art project. Denise sank into a chair at the kitchen table. Grace, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise you won't think I've lost my mind. Grace poured 2 generous glasses of wine and settled across from her. Honey, I've known you for 22 years. You're the most level-headed person I've ever met. You don't lose your mind, you just overthink until you give yourself ulcers. She pushed a glass toward Denise. What happened? I saw David today. Grace's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. What do you mean you saw David? I saw him. At Fresh Market on Mayfield Road. Alive. Shopping with a woman and 2 children. Denise's voice was steady now, matter-of-fact. Speaking the words out loud somehow made them more real and less believable at the same time. Grace was quiet for a long moment, studying Denise's face with the clinical assessment she used with clients in crisis. You know grief can. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't my imagination. It was him, Grace. Same laugh, same gestures, same way of ruffling a child's hair. The woman called him Robert. Robert? Grace leaned forward. You're sure? I followed them to the parking lot. I watched him put groceries in his car, watched him kiss the woman goodbye, watched him drive away in a blue Honda sedan. Denise picked up her wine glass but didn't drink. He's alive, Grace. My husband is alive and he's living some whole other life with some whole other family. Grace was quiet for a long time, turning her wine glass in slow circles on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. Denise, I know how this sounds, but... You think I'm having a breakdown? I think you're under a lot of stress. The anniversary of David's death is next month. The twins are about to graduate and go to college. You're facing an empty nest for the first time in 18 years. Sometimes our minds show us exactly what we need to see to finally start asking the right questions? Denise interrupted. Grace, what if I never questioned David's death because I couldn't bear to? What if there were signs I ignored because the truth was too horrible to consider? Grace reached across the table and took her hand. What kind of signs? Denise closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember details she'd buried under layers of grief and denial. The Coast Guard called to tell me about the accident, but they never found his body. They said the storm was too severe, the water too rough. They called off the search after 3 days. That's not unusual, Lake Erie can be. His personal effects were returned to me in a sealed bag. I never looked through them carefully. I just couldn't. Denise opened her eyes. What if I look now and find things that don't make sense? What if there are clues I missed? Grace squeezed her hand. What if there aren't? What if you put yourself through this pain for nothing? Then at least I'll know I tried to find the truth instead of just accepting what I was told. Denise finally took a sip of wine, feeling it burn down her throat. Grace, what if he staged his own death? What if he let me bury an empty casket while he was somewhere else, starting over? Why would he do that? David loved you. He loved the girls. I saw him with you. That man was crazy about his family. Was he? Or did I just see what I wanted to see? The question hung between them like a challenge. Think about it, Grace. Really think. In the months before the accident, was David acting differently? Was there anything that seemed off? Grace was quiet again, and Denise could practically see her mind working, sorting through memories with the same methodical approach she brought to her casework. He was stressed about work, she said slowly. The Coast Guard was downsizing and there were rumors about base closures. He was worried about job security. What else? He was distant, I guess. The last few times we all got together he seemed preoccupied. But that could have been anything. Work stress, depression, midlife crisis. Or guilt about whatever he was planning. Denise stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. I have to know, Grace. I have to find out what really happened. How? It's been 3 years. If David really faked his death, and I'm not saying he did, but if he did, what makes you think you can prove it now? Denise turned back to face her friend. Because I'm good at my job. I investigate insurance fraud for a living, remember? I know how to follow paper trails, how to spot inconsistencies, how to find the truth when people are lying. Her voice hardened. And if David Patterson is alive out there living under the name Robert Sterling or Robert whatever, then someone committed a massive fraud against his life insurance company. Against me. Against our children. Denise. Grace's voice was gentle but firm. Think about what you're suggesting. If you're right, if David is alive, then pursuing this could destroy the girls. Jasmine and Jada have spent 3 years learning to live without their father. They've built their identities around being his legacy, around making him proud even though he's gone. What happens to them if they find out he abandoned them? What happens to them if they find out their father is a liar and a fraud? The words hit Denise like physical blows. She sank back into her chair, her resolve wavering. I don't know. And what happens to you? You've rebuilt your life. You're strong now, independent. The girls see you as a hero, the woman who kept their family together after tragedy struck. Are you really willing to risk all of that for the possibility that your dead husband isn't actually dead? Denise looked at her friend, really looked at her. Grace's dark eyes were full of concern and love, but also fear. Fear for what this obsession might do to the woman she'd watched slowly heal from devastating loss. What if I can't let it go? Denise asked quietly. What if I can't unknow what I saw today? Grace reached for the tissue box and pushed it across the table. Then you call in sick tomorrow and we figure out a plan. But Dee, promise me something. Promise me that whatever you decide to do, you won't do it alone. And promise me you won't tell the girls until you know for sure what you're dealing with. I promise. Denise pulled a tissue from the box, wiping her eyes. Grace, what if I'm wrong? What if I really am having some kind of breakdown, and that man just looked like David? What if I'm about to tear apart my family chasing ghosts? Then I'll help you put the pieces back together, same as always. Grace smiled, but worry lines creased the corners of her eyes. But Dee, what if you're right? What then? Denise stared into her wine glass, seeing her distorted reflection in the dark liquid. Then I guess I find out exactly who David Patterson really was. And I figure out how to protect my daughters from the truth about their father. Outside, a car door slammed. Both women looked toward the front window, but it was just a neighbor coming home late from work. Still, Denise felt a chill run down her spine. If David was alive, if he was living in the same city, then it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed again. And next time she would be ready with questions he might not want to answer. Denise called in sick the next morning for the first time in 2 years. She sent the twins off to school with lunch money and vague explanations about a migraine, then climbed the stairs to the attic the moment their car disappeared down the street. The storage area under the eaves was neat and organized, a trait she'd inherited from her mother, with clearly labeled boxes stacked along the walls. Christmas decorations, the girls' baby clothes, high school yearbooks. And there, in the far corner where she'd banished it 3 years ago, a medium-sized cardboard box labeled simply David. Her hands trembled as she lifted it down. The box was lighter than she remembered, which somehow made it more heartbreaking. 3 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of love, and it all fit in a container that had once held office paper. She carried it downstairs to the kitchen table and sat staring at it for 10 minutes before she found the courage to open it. David's Coast Guard dress uniform lay folded on top, still carrying the faint scent of his cologne. Beneath it, his personal effects from the base: wallet, watch, keys, a coffee mug that read "World's Greatest Dad." His final letter to her, sealed in an envelope she'd been too heartbroken to open. Denise lifted out each item carefully, arranging them on the table like evidence in a case file. Which she supposed they now were. The wallet first. Driver's license, standard information, nothing unusual. Credit cards in his name, all accounts she remembered. But tucked behind his insurance card was something she didn't recognize. A small slip of paper with a phone number written in David's handwriting. She stared at the number, her pulse quickening. 7 digits, no area code. A local number. Below it, a single initial, Al. Oh. Like Linda, the name the blonde woman had used in the grocery store. Her phone buzzed. A text from Grace. How are you holding up? Do you need me to come over? Denise typed back. Found something. We'll call you later. She turned back to the items on the table. The coffee mug held loose change and breath mints, nothing significant. But the keys, she frowned, studying the ring. House key, car key, Coast Guard facility access card, and 2 others she didn't recognize. Small keys like the kind used for storage units or post office boxes. Her laptop was in the living room. She brought it to the kitchen table and opened a new browser window. The Coast Guard had procedures for everything, including the return of personal effects after a service member's death. There should be records, documentation, an official list of what had been returned to her. It took 20 minutes of searching through government websites and filing online forms, but eventually she found what she was looking for. A database of Coast Guard personnel records. David's service file showed his final deployment, his excellent service record, and the official report of his death. But as she read through the details, something nagged at her. The timeline didn't match her memory. According to the official record, David's unit had been deployed for routine training exercises on Lake Erie on September 15th. The storm that allegedly claimed his life had occurred on September 17th. But David had left for deployment on September 12th. She remembered because it was Jasmine's birthday, and he'd been heartbroken about missing it. He'd promised to make it up to her when he got back. 3 days. There was a 3-day gap between when David left home and when he was supposedly deployed with his unit. Denise pulled out her phone and dialed the number from David's wallet. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Linda. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you." The same voice. The woman from the grocery store. With shaking fingers, Denise hung up and immediately called Grace. "I found something," she said without preamble. David had a phone number in his wallet. A woman named Linda. "It's the same woman I saw him with yesterday." Grace was quiet for a moment. That could be anyone. A coworker, a friend. There's more. The dates don't match. The official record says David's unit was deployed on the 15th, but he left home on the 12th. Where was he for 3 days? Maybe the dates are wrong in the record. Government paperwork isn't always accurate. But even as Grace said it, Denise could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. "Grace, I think he was planning this. I think he spent those 3 days setting up his new life, and then he faked his death during the deployment. How would he even do that? The Coast Guard would have noticed if one of their people just disappeared. Not if he had help. Not if someone in his unit was covering for him." Denise was pacing again, her mind racing. What if the accident was staged? What if David wasn't even on the boat when it went down? "Denise, listen to yourself. This is starting to sound like a conspiracy theory. Is it? Or is it the truth I was too grief-stricken to see 3 years ago?" She stopped pacing and looked at the items spread across her kitchen table. "There's one more thing. David left me a letter. I never opened it. The one he wrote in case something happened to him? That's private. That's between you and him. Not anymore. If he faked his death, then that letter might contain clues about his real intentions." Denise picked up the sealed envelope, David's familiar handwriting across the front. "For my beautiful Denise, if I don't make it home." "Don't open it," Grace said urgently. "Not yet. Not until you've thought this through completely. Once you read that letter, you can't unread it. What if it says something that hurts you even more? What if it says something that proves he's alive?" Grace sighed. "What if it doesn't? What if it's just a loving husband's final words to his wife, and you're about to taint that memory forever?" Denise held the envelope up to the light, trying to see through the paper. "I have to know, Grace. I can't live with these questions." "Then promise me you'll wait until I get there. Don't do this alone." "I can't wait. The girls will be home in a few hours, and I need to process whatever this letter says before I have to face them." Denise's voice was resolute. "I'm opening it now." She could hear Grace getting up, probably grabbing her keys. "I'm coming over. Don't make any decisions until I get there." But Denise had already hung up. She sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of her dead husband's life, and carefully tore open the envelope that might contain the truth about who David Patterson really was. The letter was 3 pages long, written in David's careful handwriting. Denise had always loved his penmanship, the way he formed his letters with the precision of someone who'd learned to write official Coast Guard reports. "My dearest Denise, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong with my plans and I didn't make it out the way I hoped. I need you to know that leaving you and the girls is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but it's the only way to keep you safe." Denise's vision blurred. She wiped her eyes and kept reading. "I've gotten involved with people I shouldn't have trusted. What started as a way to make extra money for the girls' college funds has turned into something dangerous. They want me to use my position at the Coast Guard to help them move things across the lake, things that can't go through normal channels. When I tried to back out, they threatened you and Jasmine and Jada. I can't let anything happen to you. I would rather die than see you hurt because of my mistakes. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please tell the girls their daddy loves them more than life itself, and that everything I'm doing is to protect them. The insurance money will take care of you all. Don't look for me. Don't try to find me. Just know that somewhere I'm thinking about you every day and wishing things could have been different. I love you forever, David. P.S. If something happens and the insurance doesn't pay out, there's money hidden in safety deposit box 247 at First National. The key is with my other keys. Use it for the girls' education." Denise read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. David hadn't died. He'd run away. He'd faked his death to escape some kind of criminal situation, leaving his family to grieve while he started over somewhere else. But the man she'd seen in the grocery store hadn't looked like someone in hiding. He'd looked happy, settled, like someone who'd built a new life and moved on completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking or your daughters will pay the price." Ice flooded her veins. With shaking fingers, she screenshot the message, then immediately called Grace. "Someone just threatened the girls," she said before Grace could even say hello. "What? Denise, what are you talking about?" "I got a text. Stop looking or your daughters will pay the price." "Grace, someone knows I'm investigating David's death." "Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm at home but the girls are at school." "I need to. Don't leave the house. I'm 5 minutes away." Grace's social worker instincts had kicked in, her voice calm but urgent. "Call the school and make sure the girls are okay. Then call the police." "I can't call the police. Not yet. If David really is involved with dangerous people, reporting this could make things worse." Denise was already dialing the high school. "But I need to get the girls somewhere safe." The school secretary confirmed that both twins were in class. Denise asked her to call them to the office and keep them there until she arrived, claiming a family emergency. Grace's car pulled into the driveway just as Denise was grabbing her purse and keys. Her friend took one look at her face and immediately took charge. "Show me the letter," Grace said, scanning it quickly. "Okay, this changes everything. If David was involved with smugglers or drug dealers and they're still active, then you stumbling onto his new life could put all of you in danger. What do I do? How do I protect the girls without telling them their father is alive and a criminal? First we get them somewhere safe. Then we figure out who sent that text and how they knew you were investigating." Grace was already heading for the door. "Follow me to the school. We'll pick up Jasmine and Jada, and then you're all coming to stay at my place until we sort this out." The drive to the high school took forever and no time at all. Denise's mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. How long had someone been watching her? Were the girls in immediate danger, or was the text just meant to scare her? And what about David, or Robert, or whatever he was calling himself now? Did he know she'd found him? Was he part of the threat, or was he in danger too? At the school, Jasmine and Jada were waiting in the main office, worry etched on their faces. They'd inherited their father's sharp eyes and their mother's intuition. They knew something was seriously wrong. "Mom, what's the family emergency?" Jasmine asked immediately. "Is Grandma Evelyn okay?" "Everyone's fine," Denise lied, hating herself for it. "But I need you girls to come with me and Grace for a few days. Pack some clothes and your school things." "Why?" Jada's artists. I was already cataloging details. Her mother's pale face, Grace's tense posture, the way they kept glancing around the parking lot. "Mom, you're scaring me." Grace stepped in smoothly. "Your mom's been getting some crank calls from someone related to one of her insurance cases. It's probably nothing, but we want to be careful until the police can check it out." It was a plausible explanation, close enough to the truth to be believable. The girls exchanged glances but didn't argue. They'd learned to trust their mother's judgment about safety. Back at the house, Denise watched her daughters pack with the efficiency of kids who'd learned to be resilient. As they moved around their rooms, gathering clothes and textbooks, she felt the weight of all the decisions she'd made that had led to this moment. 3 years ago, she'd accepted David's death without question because she trusted him completely. Now she was learning that trust had been misplaced, and her daughters were paying the price. "Mom?" Jasmine appeared in the doorway of the master bedroom, where Denise was throwing things into an overnight bag. "The police will catch whoever's been calling you, right?" Denise looked at her daughter, so young but trying so hard to be strong, and made a decision. She couldn't protect the girls from the truth forever, but she could protect them from the immediate danger. "Yes, baby. Everything's going to be okay." She hugged Jasmine tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "I promise you, no matter what happens, I will keep you and Jada safe." As they loaded their bags into Grace's car, Denise took one last look at the house where she'd thought she'd built a secure life for her family. Now she understood that security had always been an illusion, built on the lie of David's death and the assumption that the people you love will never hurt you. But as Grace drove them across town to her apartment, Denise felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Determination that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with protecting her children. David Patterson had made his choice when he'd faked his death and abandoned his family. Now she was going to make hers. She was going to find out exactly who was threatening her daughters and she was going to stop them. Whatever it took. Grace's apartment was a study in controlled chaos. case files stacked on every surface, social work textbooks marking spots on the couch, and a kitchen that clearly belonged to someone who survived on takeout and determination. But it felt safer than home, and that was all that mattered right now. Jasmine and Jada settled into the living room with their homework, but Denise could see them exchanging worried glances when they thought the adults weren't looking. At 16, they were too old to be fooled by vague explanations about crank calls and too young to handle the truth about their father. Grace pulled Denise into the kitchen and spoke in low tones. "We need to talk about next steps. That text didn't come from nowhere. Someone's been watching you. The question is who? David's criminal associates from 3 years ago? Or someone connected to his new life?" Denise sank into a chair at Grace's small table. "If he's been living as Robert Sterling, then he's built a whole new identity. That takes money, connections, and help. People who help create false identities don't usually do it out of the goodness of their hearts," Grace pointed out. "They do it for profit. And they don't like loose ends that could expose their operation. So I'm a loose end." The reality settled over Denise like a weight. By investigating David's death, I've potentially exposed whatever network helped him disappear. Grace nodded grimly. "Which means the threat is real and it's not going away just because you stop looking. Then what do? I can't hide my daughters forever, but I can't protect them if I don't know who I'm protecting them from." Denise rubbed her temples where a headache was building. "And I can't exactly go to the police and say, 'My dead husband is alive and now someone's threatening my children.'" "Actually, you can." Grace pulled out her phone. "I know someone who might be able to help. Carmen Rodriguez. She's a detective with Cleveland PD, specializes in fraud cases. I've worked with her on family cases before. She's smart, discreet, and she doesn't scare easily." "What would I tell her?" "The truth. Show her David's letter, the threatening text, the evidence you found. Let her decide if there's enough to open an investigation." Grace was already scrolling through her contacts. "Carmen owes me a favor, and more importantly, she has 2 teenage daughters of her own. She'll understand the stakes." From the living room came the sound of the twins' voices, carefully controlled but tense. They were trying to do homework while their world shifted beneath their feet, and Denise's heart broke for them all over again. "Mrs. Thompson?" Jasmine appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Can we order pizza for dinner? Mom forgot to go grocery shopping yesterday." The casual question hit Denise like a punch to the gut. Yesterday, when her biggest worry had been restocking the refrigerator and helping Jada with her college application essays. Before she'd seen David in the grocery store and watched her carefully rebuilt world start to crumble again. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you girls want." Grace was already reaching for a stack of takeout menus. "Pepperoni okay?" As Jasmine headed back to the living room, Grace caught Denise's arm. "You're not alone in this. Whatever we find out, whatever happens next, you don't have to handle it by yourself. What if David comes looking for me? What if he realizes I know he's alive and decides I'm too dangerous to leave alone?" The questions had been haunting her since she'd read his letter. "What if he's not the man I thought I married? Then we'll deal with that too." Grace's voice was firm. "But you need to consider the possibility that David might not be the villain here. His letter said he was trying to protect you. Maybe he still is. By letting me grieve his death for 3 years? By starting a new family while his daughters grew up without their father." Anger flared in Denise's chest, hot and cleansing. "Even if he was trying to protect us, he still abandoned us. He still chose to let us believe he was dead rather than find another way to handle whatever trouble he was in." Grace was quiet for a moment. "You're right. But if you're going to confront him, and I can see in your eyes that you're planning to, then you need to be prepared for the possibility that he had reasons you don't understand yet. Or I need to be prepared for the possibility that the man I loved never really existed at all." The words hung between them, heavy with pain and possibility. Denise thought about the David she'd married. Charming, devoted, the kind of father who never missed a school play or soccer game. Had that man been real, or had he been another carefully constructed identity? Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number, another text. 24 hours to stop digging. "We know where the girls go to school." This time Grace saw the message too. Her face went pale. "That's it. We're calling Carmen right now." But as Grace dialed the detective's number, Denise found herself thinking about the safety deposit box David had mentioned in his letter. Box 247 at First National Bank, with money set aside for the girls' education. She'd never checked on it, never even thought about it during the insurance settlement process. What else might be in that box? More lies? More evidence of David's double life? Or maybe answers that could help her protect her daughters and bring this nightmare to an end. Carmen? It's Grace Thompson. I need a favor and it's urgent. As Grace explained the situation to the detective, Denise made her own decision. Tomorrow she was going to that bank. She was going to open David's safety deposit box and find out exactly what other secrets her dead husband had left behind. Because one way or another she was going to learn the truth about David Patterson. And then she was going to figure out how to keep her family safe from whatever consequences that truth might bring. Detective Carmen Rodriguez looked exactly like what Denise had expected. Mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of practical haircut that said she didn't have time for nonsense. They met at Grace's apartment the next morning while the twins were at school, and Carmen listened to the entire story without interruption. "Show me everything," she said when Denise finished talking. Carmen examined David's letter, the threatening texts, and the items from his personal effects with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent years sorting truth from lies. When she was done, she sat back and studied Denise's face. "I believe you," she said simply. "And I think you're all in danger." Relief flooded through Denise so strongly she nearly cried. After 3 days of questioning her own sanity, having a professional validate her concerns felt like being granted permission to breathe. "What do we do now?" Grace asked. "First, we open that safety deposit box. If David left money there, he might have left other things too. Documents, information about the people he was involved with, maybe even contact details for his new identity." Carmen pulled out a notepad. "But we do this carefully. If someone's been watching you, Mrs. Patterson, they might be monitoring your financial activity too." "How is that possible?" "Identity theft and financial monitoring are big business. If David had help creating his new life, those same people might have access to systems that can track bank activity, credit reports, even utility payments." Carmen's expression was grim. Professional identity services don't usually stop watching their clients just because the job is done. The three women drove to First National Bank in Carmen's unmarked police car. As they walked through the marble-floored lobby, Denise felt like everyone was watching them, though she knew it was probably paranoia. The safety deposit box required both David's key and the bank's master key. When the bank manager opened box 247, Denise held her breath. Inside were neat stacks of cash, $50,000 in hundreds, along with a thick manila envelope and a small leather notebook. Carmen photographed everything before they touched it, then carefully lifted out the contents. The envelope contained documents: a birth certificate for Robert Sterling, a social security card, a driver's license, and what looked like a college transcript. All the papers needed to establish a completely new identity. "This is professional work," Carmen said, examining the documents. "High-quality forgeries, probably cost him 20 grand minimum. But look at this." She held up the driver's license. "The address is local. He's been living right here in Cleveland the whole time." Denise stared at the address, 4247 Woodland Avenue. Less than 20 minutes from her house. For 3 years, while she'd been struggling to rebuild her life, David had been living in the same city, probably shopping at the same stores, breathing the same air. The leather notebook was filled with David's handwriting, dates, names, phone numbers, and what looked like a record of payments. Carmen flipped through it, her frown deepening. "Mrs. Patterson, your husband wasn't just running from criminals. He was working with them." She showed Denise a page filled with dates and dollar amounts. "These look like smuggling records. Boats crossing Lake Erie, cargo manifests, payment schedules. This goes back 5 years. 5 years." Denise's voice was barely a whisper. "But he only left 3 years ago. He only faked his death 3 years ago. He'd been planning this for much longer." Carmen continued flipping pages. "And look at this, he wasn't just a participant. These notes suggest he was coordinating shipments, managing schedules. He was a key player in whatever operation this was." Grace squeezed Denise's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Dee. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." But Denise was studying the notebook with the same analytical eye she brought to insurance fraud cases. "Carmen, look at the last few entries. The date stopped 2 months ago, but the handwriting changes. Someone else was making notes in David's book." Carmen examined the pages more closely. "You're right. And the writing is different, more hurried, less organized. Like someone was trying to take over David's role but didn't fully understand the system." "What does that mean?" "It might mean David tried to get out of the business and someone else took over his responsibilities. Or..." Carmen hesitated. "Or what?" "Or David is dead and someone killed him to take over his operation. The man you saw in the grocery store might not be your husband at all." The possibility hit Denise like a physical blow. What if she'd been wrong? What if the man who looked like David was someone else entirely? A brother she'd never known about, a cousin, even just someone who happened to resemble him. But even as the doubt crept in, she remembered the way he'd ruffled the little boy's hair, the exact gesture she'd watched him make with Jasmine and Jada 1,000 times. That wasn't something you could fake or copy. That was muscle memory, instinct, love. No, she said firmly. It was him. I know my husband's mannerisms, his expressions, the way he moves. That was David Patterson. Carmen nodded. Then we need to find out what happened to Robert Sterling. Because according to these records, someone else has been running his business for the past 2 months. As they left the bank, Denise felt the weight of new knowledge pressing down on her. David hadn't just faked his death and abandoned his family, he'd been living a criminal double life for years before that. Everything she'd thought she knew about their marriage had been built on lies. But now she had proof. She had evidence. And most importantly, she had an address. "What's our next move?" she asked Carmen as they got back in the car. "We surveil the Woodland Avenue address. We find out who's living there now and whether it's really your husband or someone else using his identity." Carmen started the engine. "But Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand something. Whatever we find, your life is about to change permanently. Are you prepared for that?" Denise thought about Jasmine and Jada, trying to focus on homework while their world shifted around them. She thought about the years of grief she'd carried, the struggles to rebuild their finances, the lonely nights when she'd cried herself to sleep missing a man who might have been living 20 minutes away the entire time. "I'm prepared," she said. "Whatever the truth is, my daughters and I deserve to know it." But as Carmen drove toward Woodland Avenue, Denise wondered if anyone was ever really prepared to discover that their entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. The house at 4247 Woodland Avenue was a modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a well-maintained yard. Children's toys scattered the front porch. A pink bicycle, a basketball, sidewalk chalk drawings of rainbows and flowers. It looked like the home of a happy family, which somehow made it worse. Carmen parked across the street, and they sat in silence for 20 minutes before the blue Honda sedan Denise recognized pulled into the driveway. The man who got out was definitely David. Older, grayer at the temples, but unmistakably her husband. He was followed by the blonde woman and the 2 children Denise had seen at the grocery store. The family moved with the easy familiarity of people who'd been together for years, the children chattering excitedly while the adults carried groceries toward the house. "That's him," Denise whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's definitely David." Carmen was taking photos with a telephoto lens. "I can see the resemblance to the pictures you showed me. But Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you something difficult. Is there any possibility your husband had a twin brother? Someone who could have taken over his identity after he died?" "No. David was an only child. His parents died in a car accident when he was 22, and he never had any other family." Denise watched her husband lift the little girl onto his shoulders, the same way he used to carry Jasmine and Jada. "That's him, Carmen. That's my husband playing happy family with another woman and her children. Then we need to approach this carefully. If David is alive and living under an assumed identity, confronting him could be dangerous for everyone involved." Carmen lowered the camera. "He's clearly been successful at maintaining this new life. People who are good at deception don't usually give up without a fight." As they watched, the family disappeared into the house. Lights came on in the kitchen windows, and Denise could see figures moving around inside, a domestic scene that should have been hers and her daughters. "I want to talk to him," she said suddenly. "Denise, that's not. I want to look him in the eye and ask him why." Her voice was steady now, cold with determination. "I want to know how he could let me bury an empty casket. I want to know how he could let his daughters believe their father was dead while he was here playing daddy to someone else's children." Carmen studied her face. "If we do this, we do it my way. I approach him first, identify myself as a police officer, and establish control of the situation. You stay in the car unless I signal otherwise. He won't run. He's got too much invested in this life to just abandon it." Denise was still watching the house. Besides, where would he go? He's already supposed to be dead. They sat in the car for another hour, watching the routine of suburban evening life play out through the windows. The children did homework at the kitchen table while the adults prepared dinner. It was painfully normal, a life David had chosen over the one he'd built with her. Finally, Carmen made her decision. "Stay here. If something goes wrong, call for backup." She handed Denise a radio. "But Mrs. Patterson, promise me you won't do anything impulsive. Whatever David tells me, whatever excuses he makes, Don't let emotion override judgment. Denise nodded, though they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Carmen walked across the street and rang the doorbell. Through the front window, Denise could see David answer the door, his face shifting from polite curiosity to shock to what looked like panic as Carmen showed him her badge and spoke too quietly to overhear. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. Carmen's posture remained professional, but David's became increasingly agitated. Finally, he stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind him, clearly not wanting the blonde woman to hear whatever they were discussing. That's when Denise made her decision. She got out of the car and walked across the street. "Hello, David," she said as she reached the porch steps. Her husband, her supposedly dead husband, looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not surprise, not guilt, but something closer to resignation. Like he'd always known this moment would come. "Denise." His voice was exactly the same, the deep baritone that had once whispered, "I love you," every night before sleep. "I was hoping you'd never find me. Were you? Or were you hoping I'd just accept your death and move on with my life while you started fresh with hers?" Denise nodded toward the house where the blonde woman was visible through the window, clearly trying to pretend she wasn't watching the drama unfold on her front porch. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me. Explain how a dead man ends up living in Cleveland with a new family while his widow struggles to pay the mortgage and his daughters grow up without their father." David glanced at Carmen, who nodded slightly. "Linda isn't my wife. She's my sister." "What?" The word came out as a gasp. "My half-sister. Our father had an affair when I was 3. Linda grew up in foster care, and I didn't know she existed until 5 years ago when she tracked me down through genealogy websites." David's voice was quiet, steady. "She was in an abusive relationship, and her ex-husband was threatening to kill her and take the kids. When I had to disappear, she needed a place to hide. We've been protecting each other." Denise stared at him, trying to process this information. "That doesn't explain why you faked your death. That doesn't explain why you let me believe you were gone. Because the people I was involved with threatened to kill you and the girls if I didn't do exactly what they wanted." David's facade cracked slightly, and she could see the pain he'd been hiding. They had photos of Jasmine and Jada walking to school. They knew their schedules, their friends' names, where you worked. "I had a choice, disappear forever or watch my family die. So you chose to watch your family grieve instead. I chose to keep you alive." His voice broke. "Denise, I have thought about you and the girls every single day for 3 years. I've driven past the house, past their school just to catch a glimpse of you. I've wanted to come home so many times, but I knew that as long as you thought I was dead, you were safe." Carmen stepped forward. "Mr. Patterson, we found your notebook. We know about the smuggling operation. What changed 2 months ago?" David looked surprised. "You found my records? How did you?" He stopped, understanding dawning on his face. "The safety deposit box. Of course. You always were too smart for your own good, Denise." Answer the detective's question. 2 months ago, the operation got taken over by new people. Violent people. The original group was mostly about moving contraband, cigarettes, alcohol, things that were heavily taxed. But the new group is into drugs, weapons, human trafficking. When I tried to back out completely, they reminded me that they still knew where to find you. "Is that who sent the threatening texts?" David's face went white. "What threatening texts?" Carmen showed him the messages on Denise's phone. As David read them, his expression shifted from shock to fury to fear. "They found you," he whispered. "God, Denise, I'm so sorry. I thought if I stayed away, if I never contacted you, you'd be safe forever. Well, you were wrong." Denise's voice was cold, but inside she felt something shifting. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "So what do we do now?" David looked at her, then at Carmen, then at the house where his sister was trying to protect her children the same way he tried to protect his daughters. "Now we end this," he said. "All of it. Whatever it takes." They moved the strategy session inside Linda's house, where David's half-sister proved to be as sharp-minded as she was protective. Linda Sterling, she kept her married name for the children's stability, listened to the whole story with the calm focus of someone who'd survived her own dangerous situation. "The new group calls themselves the Lakefront Collective," David explained as they gathered around Linda's kitchen table. "They took over most of the smuggling operations on this part of Lake Erie about 6 months ago. More organized than the old crews, but also more ruthless." Carmen was taking notes. "Who's running it?" "A man named Vincent Torres. Former military, dishonorable discharge. He's got connections to cartels operating out of Detroit and Buffalo." David's face was grim. When I tried to walk away from the whole business, Torres made it clear that wasn't an option. He said my expertise was too valuable to lose. What expertise? Denise asked. Coast Guard knowledge. Navigation routes, patrol schedules, radio frequencies, security protocols. Torres wants to expand into moving high-value cargo, drugs, weapons, even people. My information would make those operations much more profitable and much safer for them. Linda spoke up for the first time. David's been feeding them false information for months, trying to slow them down without making it obvious. But they're getting suspicious. Carmen looked between the siblings. How do you know all this, Miss Sterling? Because Torres approached me 3 weeks ago. Linda's voice was steady, but Denise could see the fear in her eyes. He knows David and I are related. He offered to pay me to convince David to cooperate fully with their operations. And if you refused? Linda glanced toward the living room where her children were watching television, oblivious to the adult conversation happening in the kitchen. He didn't make it a request. The pieces were falling into place in Denise's mind. So Torres is using both families as leverage. He threatens Linda's children to control David, and he threatens my daughters to make sure David doesn't run again. Exactly, David said. Which is why we need to end this before someone gets hurt. Torres isn't patient and he's not reasonable. If he decides we're more trouble than we're worth. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Carmen leaned back in her chair. What kind of evidence do we need to build a case against Torres and his organization? The kind that's going to get us all killed if we're not careful, Linda said bluntly. Torres has people everywhere. Police informants, Coast Guard contacts, even some judges. A conventional investigation would be compromised before it started. Then we don't do a conventional investigation, Denise said. Everyone looked at her. We do exactly what I do at the insurance company. We gather evidence of the fraud without letting them know we're onto them. David frowned. What kind of fraud? David Patterson is dead, remember? But someone's been using his Coast Guard credentials and inside knowledge to facilitate smuggling operations. That's identity fraud, benefits fraud, and probably federal conspiracy charges. Denise was thinking out loud now, her analytical mind engaging with the problem. Carmen, if we can document that Torres is using a dead man's identity and credentials for criminal activity, would that be enough for federal charges? It would be a start. But we'd need more than just David's testimony. We'd need documentation, recordings, physical evidence of the operations. I can get that, David said. Torres wants to meet with me tomorrow night to discuss a major shipment coming in next week. If I wear a wire. Absolutely not, Linda interrupted. If they find a wire on you, they'll kill you on the spot. Not if they don't find it, Carmen said thoughtfully. The department has some very sophisticated recording equipment. Devices that are almost impossible to detect unless you know exactly what to look for. Denise felt a chill of fear but also something else, hope. For the first time in 3 years, she could see a path forward that didn't involve running or hiding. What about our daughters? She asked. Jasmine and Jada and Linda's children. How do we keep them safe while this is happening? We get them out of town, Grace said. She'd been quiet through most of the conversation, but now her social worker instincts were kicking in. I have a colleague in Columbus who runs a safe house for families in witness protection situations. Completely off the books, completely secure. I'm not sending my girls away, Denise said immediately. It would only be temporary, Carmen assured her. Just until we can arrest Torres and dismantle his operation. A few days, maybe a week. David was studying Denise's face. You don't have to do this, you know. You and the girls could just disappear. New identities, new city, fresh start. I know people who could help you. Like they helped you? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. David, I've spent 3 years rebuilding my life and our daughters' lives. I'm not running away from some criminal who thinks he can threaten my family. We're going to end this and then we're going to figure out what happens next. David nodded slowly. Then we do this together. All of us. No more secrets, no more lies, no more trying to protect each other by staying apart. What do I tell the girls? Denise asked. They're going to want to know why they're suddenly being sent to a safe house, and they deserve better than more lies. You tell them the truth, Linda said quietly. Not all of it but the parts they need to know. That their father is alive, that he's been hiding to protect them, and that now you're all working together to make it safe for everyone to come home. The plan was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. David would meet with Torres and gather evidence while wearing Carmen's recording equipment. Linda would document any contacts or communications from Torres's people. Carmen would coordinate with federal law enforcement to prepare for arrests. And Denise would do the hardest job of all. She would tell Jasmine and Jada that their father had never died, and that everything they thought they knew about the last 3 years was about to change forever. As they prepared to leave Linda's house, David caught Denise's arm. "I know I don't have the right to ask this," he said quietly, "but after this is over, after Torres is arrested and the threats are gone, is there any chance we could try again? As a family?" Denise looked at the man she'd married, the father of her children, the person who'd broken her heart by choosing to disappear rather than trust her with the truth. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Ask me again when this is all over and our daughters are safe." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was simply the truth, that some betrayals take time to heal, and that love alone isn't always enough to rebuild what's been broken. But for now it was enough to move forward together toward whatever came next. The conversation with Jasmine and Jada went better and worse than Denise had expected. Better because her daughters were resilient, intelligent young women who'd learned to handle difficult truths. Worse because watching their faces cycle through disbelief, anger, hurt, and confusion broke her heart all over again. "He's been alive this whole time?" Jasmine's voice was carefully controlled, but Denise could see the fury building underneath. "We cried at his funeral and he was just living somewhere else?" "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." "No, it's not." Jada's artistic sensitivity made her emotions run closer to the surface. "He left us. He chose to leave us and let us think he was dead. How is that complicated?" Denise looked at her daughters, so much like David in their intensity, so much like her in their determination to face hard truths head-on, and chose honesty over comfort. "Your father made a terrible choice," she said. "He thought he was protecting us, but he was also protecting himself from having to find a harder, braver solution. And now we all have to live with the consequences of that choice." The sting operation went down 2 nights later at a warehouse on the lakefront. David, wearing Carmen's nearly invisible recording equipment, met with Vincent Torres while federal agents positioned themselves around the building. Denise waited in Carmen's car 6 blocks away, monitoring radio chatter and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. When Torres was finally arrested, along with 8 members of his organization, Denise felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the possibility of a future without fear. But the hardest conversation was still ahead of her. David came to Grace's apartment the day after the arrests, looking exhausted but relieved. The girls were at school, giving the adults time to figure out what came next. "The federal prosecutor says I'll probably have to testify in Torres's trial, but there won't be charges against me for the identity fraud," he said. "Apparently, faking your own death isn't technically illegal if you don't do it to commit other crimes." "And the insurance money?" Denise asked. "I'll have to pay it back, of course, plus penalties and interest. It'll take years, but we'll figure it out." David looked around Grace's apartment, the makeshift home where his family had been hiding from the consequences of his choices. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm hoping we can figure it out together." Denise had been preparing for this conversation for days, but she still wasn't sure she had the right words. "David, what you did, faking your death, letting us grieve, starting over without us, I understand why you thought it was necessary. I even understand that you were trying to protect us. But understanding doesn't mean forgiving, and forgiving doesn't mean forgetting." David nodded. "I know. The girls and I have built a life without you. We've become stronger, more independent. We've learned to make decisions and face challenges on our own. Any future we might have together has to honor that growth, not erase it." "I wouldn't want to erase it. I'm proud of who you've all become." Denise studied his face, looking for signs of the man she'd fallen in love with beneath the stranger he'd become. "We're going to need counseling, family therapy, individual therapy. And there need to be new rules about honesty, about trust, about making decisions that affect all of us. Whatever it takes. And you need to understand that Jasmine and Jada might never fully forgive you. They might choose to have a relationship with you, but it might never be the same as it was before." David's voice was thick with emotion when he answered. "As long as they're safe and happy, that's enough. As long as I get the chance to be part of their lives in whatever way they'll allow, that's more than I deserve." When the twins came home from school that afternoon, they found their father sitting at Grace's kitchen table, looking older and more uncertain than they'd ever seen him. The reunion was nothing like the movies. No running into his arms, no tears of joy, just 3 people trying to figure out how to be a family again after everything that had been broken. "Are you coming home?" Jada asked finally. "That's up to your mother and you girls," David said. "I'd like to try if you'll let me." But it has to be what everyone wants, not just what I want. Jasmine, ever practical, asked the question that mattered most. Can you promise us that you'll never lie to us again? Even if you think the truth will hurt us. David looked at his older daughter, so much wiser now than when he'd left, and gave the only answer he could. I can promise that I'll try never to lie to you again. And I can promise that if I'm ever tempted to lie, I'll remember how much my last lie hurt all of us, and I'll find the courage to tell the truth instead. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was an honest one. And for the first time in 3 years, honest felt like enough to build on. 6 months later. The Patterson family Christmas photo looked different from the ones they'd taken before David's disappearance, but it also looked more real somehow. David sat slightly apart from the others, not quite fully integrated back into the family unit but clearly working toward it. Denise's smile was genuine but complicated, the expression of a woman who'd learned that love and trust were separate things that didn't always align perfectly. Jasmine and Jada flanked their parents, young women now rather than the children they'd been when their world first shattered. They'd both started college early, driven by a maturity that came from surviving loss and rebuilding from it. The house felt different too. David slept in the guest room while he and Denise worked through their issues in therapy. Some nights they talked until dawn about the years they'd lost and the future they were trying to build. Some nights they barely spoke at all. But they were all under the same roof, all committed to figuring out how to be a family again. It was messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it was also real in a way their old life had never been. Because now they all understood that love wasn't enough if it wasn't built on truth. That protection meant trusting the people you love to handle difficult realities. And that sometimes the hardest thing about coming home isn't the physical journey, it's learning to deserve the home you left behind. David Patterson had spent 3 years learning to live as someone else. Now he was spending every day learning to become worthy of being himself again. And slowly, carefully, with more setbacks than successes, the Patterson family was learning to trust in new beginnings built on the ruins of old lies.